welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, I'm Sharon Long with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I have my librarian co-host,
Pam Strudler,
here today, and we are so excited to speak with our special guest, New York Times best-selling young adult author, Nicola Yoon. Nicola, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, and thanks for having me. I'm Nicola Yoon. I write books for teenagers and their parents and their grandparents. I wrote Everything. The Sun is Also a Star, and Instructions for Dancing, and I am the co-author of Blackout.
Yeah, and Pam and I, we just heard you and your husband, author David Yoon, speak at SLJ Teen Live. What was 2 weeks ago? That was a fun virtual conference, but I want to know, as an author, during this time switching to the new virtual way of life, how has that been for you guys?
Oh, I mean, it's terrible. It's mostly terrible. Writing is lonely, right? I mean, we're both writers, right? So usually I'm in my office and David is in our bedroom in his special, it's like a ball chair. It's like an egg-shaped chair where he cannot hear anything. We write our books, but then you get to go out and meet the people who read them, and you meet the librarians who talk about your books and the booksellers who sell them. And I miss that. I miss talking to them. I miss hugging the kids. Teen readers, when they love something, they love it with their entire hearts. And I miss them. I miss just chatting, So yeah, it's miserable. I don't like it. Not enjoying it. 0 of 10 would recommend.
Exactly. So I mentioned we got to speak with David a little bit back in May for our podcast, and he was promoting version 0 at the time. Yeah. Which is, we really enjoyed it. I mean, his take on the tech world and the evils of the internet, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome.
So when we were talking, tell him that we loved it. One of the things we discussed were how he comes up with his characters' names. And I love the character names that you pick. So I wanted to know, the names, Grace and Seymour sound like an old timey couple from Blackout, and Evie and X. It just, what kind of goes into that process?
Yeah, so my process is sort of less intellectual than Dave's, because Dave has a whole thing. I think his names are ridiculous, honestly.
I love it.
But he loves it. I just go by feel, right? I just feel like Seymour and Grace sound really nice together. I like the way they sound. They feel poetic to me. Evie and X, the names just flow. And I can start writing even without knowing the names, but when it finally comes to me, and I feel so much better. I'm just like, there we go. Now they're real people.
Absolutely. So speaking of one of the books that you've written recently, Blackout, I was so curious about how Blackout came together, that whole collaboration between what a powerful roster of young adult authors. So how did that sort of happen?
Right. So Blackout was Danielle Clayton's idea, and she tells the story of being with her niece during the summer, or sort of in the spring of 2020, and watching lots of movies, lots of romantic comedies, and not seeing Black kids in them. Aside from Everything and The Sun is Also a Star, there's not actually that many romantic comedies starring Black kids in the world. And her niece had mentioned it, and then she just sort of called us all up and bullied us basically into doing it, she's like, should we collaborate? And, it was the summer of 2020 and we were all inside, and it was really quite a relief from everything that seemed like, the world seemed like it was on fire, and this was just fun to do. So we had a really, really great time doing it.
It was just a wonderful, the way all of the stories came together, and the pieces kind of the puzzle just sort of found their home at the end. And it was just really a special book. So I know, Pam, you had a question sort of you wanted to ask about how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of your books are open-ended, or your short stories as well. And we kind of wonder at the end what happens. Do you have a picture in your mind of what happens to your characters?
I do. And it's funny because to me, they're not open-ended. And so I get like the question I get for everything for Maddie and Ollie is like, are they happy? Or the question I get the most is, will you write a sequel? And the answer is no, never. We'll never write a sequel, because then I have to break them up. And I feel like Maddie has been through a lot, and I can't write a book of 400 pages of kissing. So I would have to break them up, and no one wants that. But yeah, I mean, to me, they're happy. Natasha and Daniel from The Sun Is Also a Star, they're happy. Like, they find each other, and that's it. So to me, I won't spoil the end of Instructions for Dancing, but
I loved Instructions for Dancing. I just finished that one. I love them all, but I think is my favorite. I just love the little bit of magic in there.
Oh, thank you.
Where did you come up with the idea for that magic part?
If you read the acknowledgments, I'd been going through a hard time with my family. So like my mom was very sick and she had cancer. My father-in-law got cancer and he died during like this whole process of writing the book. And I was struggling like really hard. I could not decide what love was worth, because you're going to lose your people. And I was just like, this is the worst. Why do we love people if we're going to get our hearts broken? And so I just made that question that I was like sort of thinking about forever literal, right? So I just made it so that Evie would see how relationships end. And so she would become as cynical as I was feeling, which is, just why fall in love? Everything ends eventually. And so she can see the fact that everything ends when she sees these visions, so that I could answer that question for myself. That's why I did it, because all the books are about trying to figure out something.
Yeah, that really came together beautifully.
Thank you.
I loved it.
There was a literary sort of I don't know what it's called, literary device, but like the way you use question and answers between your characters has been something I noticed, like in Everything, like the fast 5 questions to sort of get to know each other. And then there was a section in Instructions for Dancing at the bonfire where they do the Tipsy Philosophicals, which
Yeah.
I love. Can you just explain to our listeners what that is?
Right. So the Tipsy Philosophicals, the characters in Instructions for Dancing go to bonfires on the beach, which is something that I do in my real life. And, they get a little bit tipsy, and then they ask each other like big philosophical questions. And then, they can only have a very short answer because no one wants to hear all the reasoning. It's just like, what's your gut? And, I am quite philosophical, so I really, really think about the big questions all the time. It's like kind of obnoxious, like, you really want to be at a dinner party with me? And so I love when my characters are talking about those big meaning of life questions, because I think they're important. I don't think that they're like esoteric or only intellectual. I think they really count. I think you learn about yourself and the world and who you want to be in the world by like pondering those big things. So, and I love putting them in. And I think teenagers are philosophical anyway, just their nature. Like they ask those big questions. It's us adults who forget that we should be asking all the time. So yeah, I'm putting that stuff in.
And that's, one of the things I miss so much about having teens in the library is getting that chance to kind of overhear those moments. And like, you're absolutely right. They would just sit there and like, you get to hear snippets of them, like really getting deep into all of the big meaning of life questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always fun. So also, Everything. I just reread that recently. And it actually takes on a new meaning when you read it during a pandemic, because the isolation and the fears of getting sick from the outside world, I have to say, really resonated with me. And I really felt even deeper for Maddie. And so, that book, what was the inspiration for that? Because I mean, I could see it now getting in, you could be inspired to write something like that now, but like when you first wrote it. Yeah.
Isn't it funny how
Yeah.
inspiration works? Because first of all, I did not mean to predict the future with that book. Someone tweeted that at me at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I was like, no, it's not a prediction at all. But I wrote that book because I was a new mom, right? And I was such a worrywart. Like I was the mom that would just worry about everything. Like she was gonna eat dirt, she was gonna crawl out of my house, she was just gonna get sick, all of that stuff. And I started wondering what life would be like if I had to take care of her for 17, 20 years, the way you take care of an infant. And then I flipped it to be, what would life be like for a girl who needed taking care of all that, all that time for 18, 19 years. And so that's where it came from, is actually from my own worries of just really wanting to protect. Because Penny was 4 months old when I started writing that book. And I really just was like in protection mode. I was just like, no, everyone stay away, right? And so that's where it came from. It's like that instinct to protect that can go too far, right? Because you can't keep them home forever, much as you would like to.
No, especially now, there's that instinct, and you have to find what you're comfortable in, that balance. And yeah. So, early on, actually, we're talking about like during, the pandemic, early on, I read just a different YA book that was set in 2020, but it talked about prom, and it talked about like normal high school stuff, class of 2020. And it was so jarring to read a book that actually referenced something that wasn't going to happen. And it was practically a fantasy when I read, to sort of think things that way. And just now we're starting to see a little bit of contemporary fiction talking about, set during COVID. And what are your thoughts about writing about this time period in your books going forward? I mean, is that something YA authors are discussing, like how to handle it, or just like, what are your thoughts on that?
I will say for Blackout, we deliberately did not put the pandemic in because it was meant to be just sort of a joyous book, like an escape in a way. For me personally, like I write about things, like I need to process them. So I can't imagine writing about the pandemic quite yet. Like maybe two books from now, I'm quite slow. And it just takes me a while to figure out how I feel about things, what I think they mean, right? Like I don't have hot takes ever. Like I'm just the person that's just like, that's interesting. And I will think about it for 5 years, right? But I don't know that I will yet, because I'm definitely not ready to, I'm still suffering through the trauma, as are we all, right? So I wouldn't say anything useful or insightful, or there's no point in me talking about it yet because I don't know yet.
Let's take a flip. Let's talk about joy. Let's talk about, because that's what we feel when we read your books. So yeah. So, well, one of the things that was so joyful about Instructions for Dancing was the actual dancing. And I'm curious, how did you prepare yourself for that writing? Did you do any dancing?
Yeah, I mean, so this was actually the most fun research I've ever had for a book. But when David and I got married, we took dance classes so we could do our first dance together. And then when I was writing this, I was like, oh, we should just take dance classes again so that I would know what I was talking about. And so we took private lessons at a dance studio, and we took private lessons so that I could just bug the teacher and just, interrupt her all the time and say, what does this mean? What does this mean? And so that's what we did. So we actually, in the before time, we used to have once a week date nights. And so we just made our date nights our dance nights. So we would go dance and, spend an hour and a half doing that, and then go have dinner and drink some wine and stuff. It was awesome. It was so much fun. But neither of us should give up our day jobs because we cannot dance. We're just okay.
I mean, you look back at just those simple date nights and being out and able to do that. And it's just like, oh, that's so nice you got to do that. Yeah. So speaking a little bit about Joy and Joy Revolution, your new imprint, congratulations on that. It's very exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about the imprint and what your role is and how you select the books?
Yeah, so Joy Revolution is an imprint at Random House Children's Books. It's a young adult imprint, and we are publishing joyful love stories about people of color, written by people of color. So the swoonier and the more kisses, the better is what we say. And yeah, I mean, David and I are involved we have our acquisition meetings every Thursday. And then when we acquire a manuscript, then, we read through, we give notes along with our editor, Bria Ragan, who is the world's best editor. She's fantastic. I cannot believe that we found her. And yeah, and we're just, we're getting going. It's one of these things where I have been wanting to do something like this for 20 years. Like David and I talked about wanting to put more love stories into the world when we were 27, 28, when we met in, 26, 27, when we met at Emerson for grad school. We both love love stories, and there are not enough with people of color in them, right? Like all the ones that we've loved over the years, it's like the sort of sassy sidekick, like the Black girl's the sassy sidekick. And I am not sassy. And also, I'm not the sidekick in my own life, right? Like I am the main character, as are we all. And David always says, when you see the Asian boys and things, they're like the tech on the side. They're never the one that gets the girl or the boy. And he obviously got the girl, right? Like, and people of color fall in love all the time. Which is a dumb thing to say and an obvious thing to say, and still something that I feel like I have to say, because the fact is, when you look at the media landscape, you don't see those stories that often. What you see are stories of struggle and issues, which are really, really important, because we still live in a time where there's so much inequality. But the stories of joy are just as important, right? They save your life in a different way. Like the issue books can like physically save your life if you realize that, life does get better. So, I should just hold on. But there is a metaphysical life that's worth saving. The one that says you get to have love and you get to have joy. So, I mean, I called Barbara Marcus, and I pitched her this imprint, and she was amazing. And she said yes. And now here we are.
That's awesome. So, so how does it work with how many books you can publish in a year? Like, do you sort of decide how many projects you can handle, or
Yeah. So we're aiming for 4 to 6 books a year to start, because we're just starting out. We're learning all these things. And we're getting so many manuscripts. So there's definitely people have been wanting this, right? Certainly authors are writing in. So we read as many as we get during the week. And then on Thursdays, we get on a call with our editor, and we all sort of talk about it and decide, yes, we love this. No, we don't love this. Yes, we love this, or yes, it's got potential. Can we get some changes? So that sort of thing. It's really, really educational, because I don't know the publishing side. So, along with the rest of the Delacorte team, they're teaching us so many things. It's been really fun. I mean, but for us, it's just pure passion, this project, right? We just feel like this can change the world a little bit. And so David and I are just, we're just thrilled to be able to do it.
So, so going forward, can you say if you're working on anything that you can share with us, or you and David, or, what's going on?
So David and I are working on something, but that's all I can say about it, because I don't want to die, and my editor will kill me. And then, yeah, I'm working on my next young adult book as well. So that's gonna be out one day. Hopefully it'll be good.
Soon, I hope.
Me too. I hope soon too.
And our teens hope so, because they come in and they just want to read everything that you have. They're just, you and David, your books are just constantly flying off the shelf. Really.
That is really, really nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Curious how in your house, how you help each other and read each other's works, and how that pans out.
Yeah.
You have very different styles.
We do have very different styles. David writes very quickly, which I hate him for, even though I adore him. But he will like write 2,000 words a day, and I'm just get out of here with that. If I get 500 words, I am like, yes. But we met in graduate school. We met in our very, very first writing workshop. So the way we know each other is creatively, right? Like that's how we fell in love in the first place. Like I fell in love with him partly because he's such a good writer. So, I read his stuff first, he reads mine first. We talk about story all the time, like story writ large, right? He lets me cry when I'm walking around the house hating my writing and hating like being in the middle, because I start off really strong and I get to the middle of a book and I just am, it's hell. So I will walk around the house tearing my hair out and he will comfort me and tell me I'm not a terrible writer. And yeah, it works. It works because we are these people with each other, right? We are writers because that's how we met each other. We love stories, and he's my best friend, so it works out.
Sweet. Very
Was
sweet, yeah.
did you always know that you wanted to be a writer? I know David came in from a tech background. Like how did you get started?
Well, I found my diary, I don't know, it's got to be like 10 years ago now. And I had written when I was 8 or 9 that I'm going to be a writer when I grow up, but then I completely forgot about it. So I went to high school, I was pretty good at math. I went to college and majored in electrical engineering.
Wow.
I always say math led me astray because I forgot about writing. And so I only actually got back to it my senior year of college when Cornell University, where I went, they make you take something outside of your major your senior year. And so I took creative writing because I thought it would be easy because I was obnoxious. Because I was like, after all this math, how it's just writing. And then it was like the hardest class I ever took. And I was like suffering through unrequited love with this boy. And I wrote all this stuff about him. I like bad poetry and bad plays and stories, and it was terrible. But my teacher really liked my writing, and she said, "You have potential." And then I fell in love with writing again, and that was it for me.
Is it still so difficult when you start to write, or does it come more freely now?
No, it's miserable every time. I mean, the only thing that's different is that you do know you'll get through it, even when you're in because somewhat doubt is part of the process is one of the things I've had to learn. Like you will get to a moment when you doubt everything, yourself, the story, like the reason for the story, but it's part of the process. And that is the only thing I've learned throughout. And it still feels terrible when you're in the middle of it, but I do now know that I will get to the other side eventually.
And when you do get to the other side and you have these wonderful books and they want to turn them into movies, that process, I wanted to just know, like, how involved were you with the so it was Everything and The Sun Is Also a Star were both turned into so could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so both of those were done by Warner Brothers and MGM, and the executives were really generous, right? So they allowed me to read the scripts and to give notes. And they don't have to do that, right? Because once you sell the rights to your work, they can make it they could put everything in the ocean or outer space if they wanted to, right? So that's something to know. And then, part of it is that you have to let it go, right? Because they are making new art about your work. And that's what's wonderful about it. It took me a while to realize that because at first I was like, no, why isn't it exactly the same when I read the script for Everything the first time? But then I got to appreciate that, what it is that we're making more art about these characters that I've created and that I've loved. And it is a different art form and it's never going to be exactly the same. And so I love those movies, but they are different than the books, right? And I think they exist independently and should, and I love them all.
They're like cousins.
Right.
Family of,
I've never thought of it that way, but yes, cousins.
Would you ever consider writing a different in a different genre? Because we love your love stories, but like, do you ever think about venturing out?
Yes, I do think about it.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. We shall see what happens.
Ooh,
Uh,
we might have an exclusive now.
a surprise.
Yeah. We want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're all over the place doing all these wonderful things, and the fact that you were able to take time to speak to us is just, thank you so much. We really do appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I appreciate that you wanted to talk to me. So thank you
Aw.
for taking the time out of your day. And talking to me.
Absolutely. This was Sharon and
Pam.
from the Syosset Library with our special guest.
Nicola Yoon.
And that closes this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.